Welcome to Beyond the Hourglass. I'm so glad you could join me today. Ever met someone who is absolutely convinced they're an expert in something, yet they clearly have no clue what they're talking about? I sure have. I once had a neighbor who swore up and down that drinking a glass of warm salt water every morning would flush toxins out of my body. He wasn't a doctor or a scientist, just a very confident guy with a lot of opinions. And yet, there he was, lecturing me like he had just discovered the cure for all human ailments. Turns out, drinking too much salt water is actually dangerous. But he refused to believe it because, in his words, I saw a guy on YouTube say it works. Have you ever noticed that the people who know the least about a topic often seem the most confident about it? There's actually a name for that. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It's a psychological phenomenon where people with low ability in something tend to overestimate how skilled they actually are. Basically, they don't know enough to realize what they don't know. Meanwhile, truly knowledgeable people often second-guess themselves because they do understand how complex things really are. It's a fascinating and sometimes frustrating quirk of human nature, but once you start recognizing it, you'll see it everywhere. You know that feeling when you're listening to someone talk with absolute confidence about something, only to realize they have no idea what they're saying? That's the Dunning-Kruger effect in action, and today, we're going to break it down together. We'll start by understanding what it is and why it happens. Then, we'll look at some real-world example. And most importantly, we'll talk about how to avoid falling into this trap ourselves. The truth is, none of us know everything, and that's okay. The key is learning to recognize when we might be overestimating our own knowledge so we can keep growing and improving. My hope is that by the end of this, you'll feel empowered, not just to spot the Dunning-Kruger effect in others, but to check in with yourself too. Because the more we embrace curiosity and humility, the smarter we actually become. Sound good? Let's dive in. So, let's talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, a term that might sound fancy, but once you understand it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. It was named after two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who studied why some people are so confidently wrong. What they found is pretty fascinating. The less people know about something, the more they tend to believe they know. In other words, when someone has very little skill or knowledge in an area, they don't have enough understanding to recognize their own ignorance. So they overestimate themselves big time. Picture a mountain where beginners climb quickly to what researchers jokingly call the peak of Mount Stupid, that first burst of confidence before realizing just how much they don't know. From there, many people eventually hit what's called the Valley of Despair, where reality sets in, and they realize, whoa, this is actually way harder than I thought. If they keep going, they gradually climb their way to real competence, but that first overconfidence is something we've all witnessed, or maybe even experienced ourselves. It explains why brand new drivers think they're amazing, why first-time entrepreneurs believe they'll be millionaires overnight, and why someone who watched one YouTube video suddenly thinks they understand quantum physics. It's not that these people are dumb. It's just that they don't know what they don't know. And honestly, we've all been there at some point, haven't we? The good news? Once we understand this effect, we can start recognizing it in ourselves and others, and that's the first step toward real wisdom. Now that we understand what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, let's talk about where we see it in real life, because trust me, it's everywhere. One of the most common examples is the armchair expert. You know, the person on social media who thinks they know more than actual scientists. They watched one documentary or read one article, and suddenly, they're giving out medical advice like they have a PhD in brain surgery. Then there's the bad driver syndrome, where the most confident drivers are often the worst ones on the road. They'll weave in and out of traffic, ignore speed limits, and then blame everyone else when they nearly cause an accident. And if you ask them, oh, they'll tell you they're an amazing driver. The thing is, truly skilled people usually understand the risks and complexity of what they're doing, so they tend to be more cautious. Meanwhile, the ones who don't know any better think they're invincible. And that's why recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect in action can help us be a little more skeptical, not just of others, but of ourselves too. Let's take a look at some historical and cultural examples of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Because if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that overconfidence can be dangerous. Take flat earthers and science deniers, for example. These are people who loudly insist they've done their own research, yet ignore mountains of actual scientific evidence. Instead of listening to experts who've spent years studying physics and astronomy, they'll watch a few YouTube videos and suddenly believe they know better than NASA. Then there's the classic case of failed business ideas. Those folks who are absolutely convinced they're about to become millionaires, despite ignoring expert advice. They refuse to listen to feedback, don't bother learning the basics, and charge ahead with blind confidence, until reality catches up with them. The sad part? If they had taken the time to actually learn, ask for help, and adjust their approach, they might have succeeded. The lesson here? Confidence is great, but confidence without knowledge is a recipe for disaster. Now that we know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is and how it shows up in everyday life, let's talk about something even more important: how to make sure we don't fall into this trap ourselves. The truth is, we all have blind spots. No matter how smart or experienced we are, there will always be things we don't know, and that's okay. The key is to recognize our own limitations instead of pretending we have all the answers. That means staying humble, being open to learning, and reminding ourselves that there's always more to discover. Instead of assuming we're right, we can get curious and ask, what if I'm wrong? Or what else could I learn about this? Being willing to admit what we don't know doesn't make us weak. It actually makes us stronger and smarter. The more we embrace learning, the more we grow, and that's how real wisdom happens. So let's choose growth over ego, because being open to new knowledge is one of the best things we can do for ourselves. One of the best ways to avoid the Dunning-Kruger effect is to remember this simple truth: experts exist for a reason. It can be tempting to assume we know better, especially when information is just a quick Google search away. But there's a huge difference between reading about something and actually understanding it. That's why it's so important to trust professionals, whether it's doctors, scientists, financial advisors, or skilled tradespeople, because they've spent years learning what we can't pick up in an afternoon. Before confidently sharing something as fact, it's always worth asking, where did I get this information? And is it from a credible source? We've all seen how quickly misinformation spreads, and let's be honest, no one wants to be that person who loudly shares bad advice. There's no shame in saying, I don't know enough about this. Let me check with someone who does. In fact, that kind of humility makes us more credible, not less. The smartest people aren't the ones with quick, overconfident answers. They're the ones who take the time to seek out the truth. And that's something we can all strive for, no matter where we are in life. One of the best ways to avoid the Dunning-Kruger effect is to embrace something truly powerful: lifelong learning. The smartest people aren't the ones who think they have all the answers. They're the ones who are always questioning, growing, and staying curious. In fact, the more you learn about something, the more you realize just how much you don't know. And that's actually a good thing. It means you're gaining real understanding, not just surface-level knowledge. This is the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with very little knowledge think they know it all. Instead of clinging to certainty, Lifelong learners ask, what else is there to discover? And how can I improve? They read, listen, explore new ideas, and most importantly, they stay open to changing their minds when they learn something new. Growth doesn't stop when we graduate school. It's a lifelong journey, and the more we embrace that, the wiser we become. So let's keep learning, questioning, and staying open, because that's where real intelligence lives. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is a fascinating and sometimes frustrating reminder that the less we know, the more we tend to overestimate ourselves. It happens because people with limited knowledge don't yet have the awareness to see their own gaps. We've seen it everywhere, from social media experts to overconfident drivers, clueless bosses, and even big historical blunders. But the good news? We can all avoid falling into this trap by staying humble, checking our facts, and committing to lifelong learning. Because at the end of the day, the smartest thing we can do is recognize that there's always more to discover. So next time you meet someone who thinks they know everything, just remember, confidence doesn't equal competence. A little humility and a willingness to learn go a long way. Have you ever met someone who perfectly fits the Dunning-Kruger effect? Or maybe you've caught yourself falling into it. I know I have. Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep these conversations going. See you next time.